Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Cult of Chucky. Now, Cult of Chucky came out in 2017, and this is the 7th and so far final film in the Child's Play franchise. Now, Cult of Chucky was written and directed by Don Mancini, who also wrote all the other Child's Play movies. Now, I'm doing this review for Horror Month, which is something I do every October, where I review all the films in different horror franchises. But since I'm done reviewing all the horror franchises for this year's Horror Month, I decided to do something a little bit different. What I wanted to do was review newer installments of franchises I've already reviewed in the past. So for Horror Month of 2013, I reviewed all the Child's Play movies, but since then, there of course has been another one. Now, I'll leave links to my reviews on all the other Child's Play movies in the description below, but real quick before I get on to this review, I'll give a quick little rundown of what I thought of each Child's Play movie leading up to this, but the original Child's Play is one of my all-time favorite horror films, and what I love about the original film is it is a silly premise, but in a lot of ways it's a film that is almost better than it has any right to be, because while it is a silly premise, it takes itself very seriously, but it works. It works because of how well acted the film is and how well made the film is. And Child's Play 2, I also like a lot. What I like about Child's Play 2 is it really is Andy's movie. Andy was one of the main characters of the first Child's Play film, but Child's Play 2, he really is the main protagonist, and Alex Vincent really does carry that movie. Now, Child's Play 2 was definitely more of a horror comedy than the first one was. The first Child's Play film had some humor, but Child's Play 2 definitely upped the humor. Then you had Child's Play 3, which I personally like. I know a lot of people hate it, but I like it personally. Then you had Bride of Chucky, which I know is a very polarizing film among a lot of horror fans. Some people love it and some people hate it. Personally, I think it's the best of the Child's Play sequels. And it's definitely much more of a comedy than the other Child's Play movies were. I mean, there was humor in the first one, and Child's Play 2 and 3 were also basically horror comedies, but this one definitely ups the comedy to a point where it's almost more of a comedy than a horror film, but I do enjoy Bride of Chucky a lot. Then you had Seed of Chucky, which wasn't even a horror film in my opinion. That was pretty much a straight comedy, and I hate that one. In my opinion, Seed of Chucky is easily the worst film in the franchise. Then you had 2013's Curse of Chucky, which this film is a direct sequel to, and I remember I gave that a pretty positive review when I reviewed it, and I thought it was pretty good. At the same time, though, it's not really one I really had a desire to go back and watch again, but overall, I am a fan of the Child's Play series. The first 4 Child's Play movies are among some of my favorite horror films of all time, but after Bride of Chucky, from like Seed on, I hate to say it, the franchise is kind of like, I could almost take it or leave it after that. Now we come to this film, Cult of Chucky, which I will say I liked, but I liked it better watching it a second time. When I first watched this, I'll admit, I didn't really care for it that much. I actually grown to appreciate it a little bit more watching it again and watching it with Don Mancini's audio commentary, because after hearing his commentary on the film, I really do see what he was going for with this, and I actually respect what he was going for. Now, the plot of Cult of Chucky is it's set 4 or 5 years after the events of the previous film. Now, in the previous film, you followed this woman named Nica, who was a paraplegic who Chucky was going after, and Chucky killed her entire family. But basically, in this movie, she's in a psychiatric hospital following the events of the previous film, and and everybody thinks that she killed her family, and nobody believes her about Chucky. And after all these years, her doctor has convinced her that Chucky was all in her head and she did kill her family, but basically she's at this psychiatric hospital and Chucky ends up coming back for her, but the way he comes back for her is actually pretty interesting and is something that you never really seen done in a Child's Play movie before. But basically in this movie, the character of Andy Barclay, who was the main character of the first 3 movies, he comes back, and in the film you see him trying to help Nica. Now, this is kind of a spoiler, but this is one of the things I thought was really interesting about this film, so I am going to give away this spoiler here. But basically in the movie you find out that Chucky has discovered a spell that essentially allows his soul to possess multiple bodies at the same time. So in this film, you have multiple Chuckies. And I thought that was really interesting. I also thought it was interesting how each incarnation of Chucky has his own distinct personality. Now, of course, in the film, Brad Dourif returns to play the voice of Chucky, and he, of course, is great, but he really has sort of embodied this character over the years. And even in a bad movie, Brad Dourif always brings his A-game. Now, Fiona Dourif, who is the daughter of Brad Dourif, she plays the character of Nica, and she's easily the best part of this movie. She was also the best part of Curse of Chucky, in my opinion. And she's such a sympathetic character, especially in this movie, and Fiona Dourif really does act her ass off in this film. Her acting's also really good at the end of the film, and I don't want to give away the ending, but it's interesting. It's really, really interesting. And Alex Vincent reprises his role as Andy Barclay. Now, Andy did show up in an after-credit sequence in Curse of Chucky, but here he's actually one of the main characters. That being said, I do kind of wish he was in the movie a little bit more. But ultimately, this is still Nica's movie. And Jennifer Tilly returns as Tiffany, and technically herself as well, because Jennifer Tilly played herself in Seed of Chucky, and at the end of Seed of Chucky, the spirit of Tiffany took possession of Jennifer Tilly, so technically Jennifer Tilly's character in this movie is Jennifer Tilly herself being possessed by the spirit of Tiffany. And there's a little joke about that in the movie, because there's a certain point where Nica does meet Tiffany, and she's like, "You look a lot like Jennifer Tilly." But yeah, Cult of Chucky I enjoyed and I appreciated, but I appreciated it more watching it a second time. Once again, I didn't really care for it watching it the first time. And I will say this is definitely a movie made for followers of the series, because there's a lot of stuff in this movie where if you're not familiar with the other films, you're going to be completely lost. But I actually do appreciate that, because I appreciate how the Child's Play series, while it doesn't have the best continuity in the world, there is still continuity in this series, and Don Mancini does seem to really respect the continuity of this franchise, even though he admits that each film is very tonally different. And another thing I thought was interesting is there are moments in the film where Don Mancini is trying to be kind of artistic with some of it and be a little surreal, because this is taking place in a psychiatric hospital. There's certain points in the movie that are taking place in certain characters' heads, so he does get a little surreal in certain points, which I thought was interesting because you don't usually see stuff like that in a Chucky movie. And there were some creepy things in this movie, like, I don't know if I want to call this creepy or more just really sad, but there's this character at the psychiatric hospital, this woman who you find out later on in the film lost her baby, and I won't give away how she lost her baby, but she basically thinks the good guy doll is her baby, and it's really freaking sad. Sad, but also creepy as well, because there's a certain point where she's breastfeeding the good guy doll, and since the good guy doll is actually possessed by the spirit of Chucky, it actually does bite her breast. Actually, the more I think about it, There are actually a lot of things I do kind of like about this one. It's still not one of my favorite films in the franchise, but it's a movie I could definitely see growing on me over the years. And it's actually quite different than the other Child's Play movies. Now, whether or not that's gonna work for all people, I don't know, but it definitely worked for me. But once again, a lot of it worked for me watching it a second time. It's weird, like the first time I watched this, I really wasn't into it, but watching it again, I found a lot of stuff to really appreciate about this. There's still some things about the movie that don't really work for me. Like, I do feel like it gets a little overboard with some of the meta jokes, because there's a little reference to the TV show Hannibal. Like, at a certain point, Chucky compares himself to Hannibal Lecter, and Don Mancini actually wrote a few episodes of the 3rd season of Hannibal, and Chucky makes a little comment like, man, they really shouldn't have canceled that show. And it's like, okay, I don't know, it was a funny joke, but it kind of broke the tone a little bit. And there's also a lot of fan service in this, but it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, we get it. But there is an after-credit sequence that if you're a fan of Child's Play 2, you might really appreciate. So yeah, I know this has been kind of a mixed review and somewhat of a wishy-washy review, but I would say overall I enjoyed this film, but it's a movie I can definitely see myself liking more as time goes on. Now, this does leave it open for a sequel, and Don Mancini has said that he wants to do a Part 8, but I'm not sure if that's gonna happen because I know they're also planning on rebooting the franchise. But yeah, that was my review on Cult of Chucky. Now, back in 2013, I also reviewed all the Hellraiser movies, and since then there's been another Hellraiser film. So my next movie review is going to be on Hellraiser Judgment, the latest film in the Hellraiser franchise.